"No man wants me," said the Apache girl. A lonely rancher took her in. Unaware of her secret, Tom Westbrook had spent most of his life on the wide, dusty plains of the western frontier. A rancher by trade, he spent long hours under the hot sun, working with his cattle, repairing fences, and ensuring that his land was well tended. Tom's ranch was simple, just a small house, a barn, and a stretch of land that seemed to go on forever. His days were routine, filled with hard work and the silence of the open land. The only sounds that broke the stillness were the occasional cries of birds or the low moo of a cow. But as the years passed, Tom found himself feeling more and more lonely. There were times late in the evening when he would sit on his porch, watching the sunset behind the mountains, and wonder what it would be like to have someone to share his life with. He wasn't a man who needed much. He had his land, his cattle, and the steady rhythm of ranch life. But even the most content of men, Tom thought, still needed company once in a while. He had seen the way others in town lived. Married couples with children, families who gathered together for meals, laughter filling their homes. He had once hoped for something like that, but as the years wore on, it seemed less and less likely. Maybe he was just meant to live alone. Then, one evening, as a storm began to brew on the horizon, something changed. It was a late night. The kind when the wind blew colder than usual, and the sky turned dark with heavy clouds. Tom had just finished his work for the day and was preparing to head inside for his dinner when he saw a figure in the distance. At first he thought it was just a trick of the light, but as the figure came closer, he could make out the shape of a woman, walking slowly toward his ranch. She was a stranger to him, someone he had never seen before. Her clothes were dusty and torn, as if she had been traveling for days. The way she walked, her head slightly downcast, suggested wariness, but there was also a quiet strength in her movements. She didn't seem to be in a hurry, just steadily making her way toward him. Tom was surprised. There weren't many travelers who ventured this far out into the wilderness. He wondered what had brought her to his lonely corner of the world. Tom wasn't sure what compelled him, but he stood up from his porch and walked toward the woman. As he got closer, he could see her face more clearly. Her skin was tanned from the sun, her eyes dark and full of something unreadable. She wasn't young, but she wasn't old either. Maybe in her 20s, but with an air of experience that seemed far beyond her years. Her hair was long and wild, tangled by the wind, but even in its messy state it framed her face in a way that made Tom pause for a moment. "Evening," Tom called out, his voice breaking the silence of the night. The woman looked up, startled at first, but then she seemed to relax, as though she had been expecting someone. She didn't smile, but her eyes softened just a little. "Evening," she replied, her voice low but steady. Tom couldn't help but notice how tired she looked. Her shoulders slumped under the weight of some invisible burden, and her hands were calloused, as if she had been doing hard work. He knew he couldn't leave her out there, especially with the storm rolling in. He wasn't the type of man to turn away someone in need. "Looks like a storm's coming. You'd better come inside and get out of the weather," he offered. "I've got a spare room. It's nothing fancy, but it'll be warm." The woman hesitated for a moment, as if weighing her options. She glanced toward the darkening sky, then back at Tom. There was a fleeting look in her eyes, almost like fear, but it was gone before Tom could figure out what it meant. Finally, she nodded. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I'd appreciate that." Tom didn't say much more as he led her inside. They didn't talk much during dinner either. Tom didn't ask her where she was from or what brought her out this way. He wasn't one to pry into people's business, especially with strangers. Instead, they ate in silence, the storm outside beginning to rage, the wind howling against the walls of the small cabin. After they finished, Tom showed her to the small guest room. It wasn't much, just a bed, a warm blanket, and a small window looking out into the dark night. It wasn't the Ritz, but it was a safe place, and that was enough. The woman thanked him again before she closed the door behind her, and Tom retired to his own room. That night, as Tom lay in bed, he found himself thinking about the woman. Something about her intrigued him, but he couldn't put his finger on what it was. She seemed like someone who had seen things that had left marks on her, even if she didn't show them. There was a quiet sadness in her eyes, but also a strength that reminded him of the land itself. unyielding, tough, and unwilling to bend under the weight of the world. Tom's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of the storm growing louder, the rain tapping against the roof like 1,000 tiny fingers. He closed his eyes and tried to sleep, but sleep didn't come easily. His mind kept returning to the woman, and he wondered if she would stay for long. Would she be like the other travelers who had passed through his life, or would she remain, like he had once hoped for? The next morning, Tom woke early, as he always did. The storm had passed, leaving the air fresh and cool. He went to check on the woman, unsure of what he would find. He knocked on the door to the guest room, and when she answered, he was surprised to see her already up, standing by the window, looking out at the land. "Morning," she said, her voice a little more at ease than the night before. "Morning. Did you sleep all right?" She nodded, but there was a flicker of something in her eyes that Tom couldn't quite read. "Yes, thank you." Tom hesitated, then said, "I've got work to do out in the fields. If you want, you can stay here for as long as you need. There's plenty of food, and you don't have to go anywhere until you're ready." She looked at him for a long moment, then nodded again, her face softening just a little. "Thank you," she said, and for the first time Tom noticed the smallest hint of a smile on her lips. And so the woman stayed, and over the next few days she became a part of the rhythm of Tom's life. She didn't speak much about herself, but she helped with small chores around the ranch, tending to the animals and helping in the garden. She was quiet, but there was something about the way she moved that caught Tom's attention. It was as if she belonged here, like the land itself had somehow called her back. Yet Tom knew there was something she wasn't saying, something she was hiding. He could see it in the way her eyes would cloud over when she thought no one was looking. But he didn't ask. There were many things people didn't say, and Tom wasn't the type of man to push. But little did he know, the woman he had taken in was not just anyone. She was an Apache girl, and the secret she carried was a dangerous one that would change both of their lives forever. In the days that followed Kaya's arrival at Tom Westbrook's ranch, she remained mostly quiet. The storm had passed, but her presence was a lingering thing, like a shadow that followed her every step. Tom was used to solitude and didn't mind the silence that hung between them. In fact, there was something comforting about it, like the calm that followed a storm. Kaya, for her part, seemed content to keep to herself, spending her days working around the ranch. She didn't ask for much, only food, shelter, and a few quiet moments at the end of the day to gather her thoughts. Tom didn't question her, respecting her need for space, but there were times when he couldn't help but wonder. Her eyes, dark and deep, held a sadness that seemed to run far beyond the horizon. It wasn't just the weariness of someone who had traveled a long distance. It was the look of someone who had seen the worst of the world and had been shaped by it. Kaya was different from anyone Tom had ever known. She didn't laugh much, didn't speak of herself, and kept to her routines. But there was something in the way she worked, something about the way she moved among the animals on the land that spoke of strength. In the mornings, Kaya would rise before the sun, slipping out of the cabin quietly so as not to disturb Tom. She would go to the barn to feed the horses and check on the cows, moving with purpose, her hands steady and sure. Her movements were graceful despite the hard work she did. She could lift a bale of hay or carry a bucket of water with ease, and yet there was an unmistakable air of sadness about her, as if she was carrying some heavy weight that no one could see. Tom would watch her from the porch as he drank his coffee, not knowing what to say. He respected her space, but sometimes, when she thought he wasn't looking, he would catch glimpses of her face, and there would be a flicker of something in her eyes. A flash of pain so quick that he couldn't be sure it was even real. It was like a ghost that passed through her, and then she would be back to her quiet self, moving through the motions of the day. One evening, after a long day of work, Tom decided to ask Kaya to sit with him on the porch. It had been a week since she arrived, and though she had been nothing but kind and helpful, Tom felt there was still something unsaid, something that kept her from fully settling into her new life. It was a gentle question, but one that had been on his mind for days. "Kaya," Tom said, his voice rough from the long day. "I know you've been through a lot. You don't have to tell me your story if you don't want to, but if there's anything I can do, anything at all, you just need to say the word." Haya was sitting a few feet away, her back straight, her hands resting on her lap. She had been staring at the horizon, watching the sun dip below the distant mountains, but now her eyes slowly turned toward him. There was a long silence before she spoke. "I don't need anything," she said softly, her voice almost a whisper. "I'm not used to asking for help." Tom studied her face, watching the way her eyes shifted, as if she was trying to hide something. He could see that she wasn't being entirely honest, but he also knew she wasn't ready to share. He didn't press her, but he also couldn't stop wondering what had happened in her life that had made her so guarded. "Sometimes it's hard to let people in. I get that," Tom said gently. "But you don't have to carry everything alone. You're safe here." Kaya nodded, her eyes never leaving the ground. There was something about the way she looked, as though she was seeing something far away, something that Tom couldn't reach. The wind picked up, blowing a few strands of her dark hair across her face, and she brushed them away absently. "Do you ever feel like you don't belong?" Kaya asked suddenly, her voice tinged with a sadness Tom hadn't expected. Tom was caught off guard by the question. He had always felt at home on his land, even in the loneliness of it. But he understood what she meant. He had seen people come and go in the town, all of them with families, communities, connections. Sometimes even he felt the ache of being alone. But he couldn't imagine what it must be like to feel like you didn't belong anywhere at all. "I suppose everyone feels like that sometimes," Tom said slowly. "But the land, this place, it always felt like home to me. It doesn't matter who's here or who's not, the land has a way of making you feel like you're part of something bigger." Kaya was silent for a moment, her eyes focused on the far-off mountains. Tom waited, giving her the space to speak if she wanted to. Then, after what seemed like an eternity, she looked at him, her expression unreadable. "You don't understand," she said quietly. "I've been running for a long time. I don't belong anywhere." "Not anymore." Tom didn't know how to respond to that. There was so much in her words, so much pain, but also something else, something that spoke of a deep wound that ran so much deeper than anything Tom had experienced. It was clear now that Kaya wasn't just a lost traveler. She was someone who had been through something terrible, something that had marked her in a way that was impossible to erase. He didn't press her for details. He didn't need to. But he could see now that the woman who stood before him was not just a stranger seeking refuge from a storm. She was someone with a past, one that she could never escape. The days went by, and Tom continued to offer Kaya a sense of stability, though she kept to herself. There were moments when she seemed almost at ease, moments when she would share small smiles or look at him with something resembling trust in her eyes. But those moments were fleeting, like the calm before the storm. Tom never pried into her past, never asked her what she was running from. He had his own ghosts, his own quiet sorrow that he kept buried deep inside. But every now and then, he would catch a glimpse of something in Kaya's eyes, something so sad and distant, and he would wonder about the things she wasn't saying. One afternoon, as they worked together in the fields, Kaya paused for a moment, looking out at the land. The sun was low in the sky, casting long shadows across the rolling hills. She didn't say anything at first, just stood there, her hands on her hips, breathing in the air like it was her first time taking it in. "Do you ever feel like you're running away from something?" she asked, her voice distant, almost to herself. Tom stopped working for a moment, looking at her. He didn't know what to say. He had spent most of his life running away from his own memories, trying to forget the pain of losing his family. But he had never been on the run like Kaya. Her pain was different, more raw, more present. "I don't know if I understand what you mean," Tom said honestly. "But I do know this. There comes a time when you have to stop running and just let yourself be where you are." Kaya turned to look at him, her eyes dark but full of something more, something softer, something human. "I don't know if I can stop running," she whispered, almost to herself. The silence between them felt heavy, full of things unspoken. Tom didn't have the answers for her, didn't know how to heal the pain that she carried. But he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going to let her run alone. He would be there, as long as she needed him. And so, they continued, side by side, working the land, living their quiet lives. But Tom couldn't shake the feeling that the storm wasn't over. It was just waiting to break, and when it did, it would change everything. As the days stretched into weeks, Tom and Kaya's lives became intertwined, though neither spoke about the deepening connection between them. They worked side by side on the ranch, tending to the animals, mending fences, and gathering firewood for the coming winter. The rhythm of their lives was steady, and in the silence between them there was a sort of unspoken understanding. Kaya had become part of the land in a way, blending into the routine without making a fuss. Tom's quiet presence gave her a sense of peace she hadn't known in a long time, and though she never said it, she felt a sense of safety that she hadn't dared to hope for. Yet there was always a distance, a gap between them that Kaya never allowed to close. She was careful not to let her guard down even as the days grew warmer and the nights colder. There were times when Tom thought she might open up, when her eyes would linger a little longer on him, or when she would laugh softly at a joke he made. But those moments were fleeting, like the passing clouds on a windy day, vanishing before he could reach them. One evening, as they sat on the porch after a long day's work, Kaya spoke for the first time about the past that she had hidden so carefully. The sun was just beginning to set, painting the sky with shades of orange and purple. Tom had been quiet, sipping his coffee, when he noticed Kaya staring out at the horizon, her gaze distant. There was something in her eyes, something heavy, like a weight that had been there for years. For a moment he thought she might say something, but she didn't. Instead, she took a deep breath, letting it out slowly as if she had been holding it in for too long. "I've seen things," Kaya said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Things I don't know how to forget." Tom's heart skipped a beat. There was a sadness in her words that he couldn't ignore. She wasn't looking at him now, her gaze fixed on the far-off hills, as if the answer to her pain lay somewhere out there in the distance. "I've had to leave everything behind," she continued, her voice soft but steady. "My family, my people, everything. And every day, it feels like a piece of me is missing, like I'm not even sure who I am anymore." Tom set his cup down carefully, his mind racing. He had suspected that Kaya carried a past with her, but hearing it from her own lips made it real. He could see it in her eyes now, the burden of what she had lost, the uncertainty of her place in the world. He knew she was talking about more than just a difficult life. She was speaking of a loss so deep it had shaped her very soul. "I didn't choose this life," Kaya added, her voice trembling for the first time. "I didn't choose to be alone." Tom didn't know what to say. He could feel the weight of her words, the depth of her sorrow.
There was so much more to her than the quiet woman he had taken in.
She wasn't just a traveler passing through. She was someone with a past that she couldn't escape, no matter how hard she tried. Tom could see that now. But what could he do? He wasn't a man of grand gestures or deep words. He had never been good with feelings or comforting someone. All he knew was hard work and silence, the kind of life that didn't ask for much but gave back what it could. "You don't have to tell me anything you don't want to," Tom said quietly. "But I'm here, if you need to talk, or if you just need someone to listen." Kaya nodded, though she didn't look at him. She seemed grateful for the offer, but it was clear she wasn't ready to share everything. Not yet, and maybe not ever. But for the first time, Tom saw a crack in her armor. A hint that, maybe, she was starting to trust him just a little. It wasn't much, but it was something. The next few days went by as they always did, work in the fields, tending to the animals, and quiet evenings spent with little conversation. Kaya continued to keep to herself, but Tom noticed subtle changes. She was a little more at ease around him, a little more relaxed in her movements. It wasn't much, but it was progress. One afternoon, while Tom was working on the far side of the ranch, he noticed something strange. Kaya was standing by the barn, her back to him. But there was something about the way she stood that made him pause. Her shoulders were tense, her head slightly turned, as if she was listening for something. Tom watched her for a moment, unsure of what to do. Then, just as quickly as it had come, the tension disappeared, and Kaya relaxed, turning to continue her work. Tom couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. He knew Kaya had a past, but there was more to it than she was letting on. Something that had made her so guarded, so afraid to let anyone in. He couldn't help but wonder if there was a secret she was hiding, one that went deeper than the loss of her family. He wasn't sure what it was, but his gut told him there was more to the story than she had shared. Later that evening after dinner, Tom asked her about the look he had seen earlier. He didn't want to pry, but the unease he felt had been growing stronger. "Kaya," Tom said softly, setting his cup down. "Earlier today you seemed, I don't know, like something was bothering you. If there's something you want to talk about, I'm here." Kaya looked up at him, her face unreadable. For a long moment she said nothing, just stared at him as if weighing her options. Then, finally, she spoke. I'm not used to being around people," Kaya admitted. "For so long it's been just me, and when you've been on your own for so long, it's hard to trust anyone. It's hard to let someone in." Tom nodded slowly. He understood that feeling. It wasn't easy to let go of the walls you built around yourself, especially when those walls had been there for so long. But something about Kaya's words struck him. She wasn't just afraid of trusting him. There was more to it than that. "I get it," Tom said quietly. "But you don't have to do this alone. I'm not going anywhere." Kaya looked down, her hands gripping the edge of the table as if she was holding herself steady. Tom could see the conflict in her eyes, the tug-of-war between wanting to share and wanting to keep everything inside. For a moment he thought she might say more, but instead she just nodded, her gaze turning inward. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I don't know how to explain it. But I promise you, it's not about you. It's just me." Tom didn't press her. He could tell that she wasn't ready to open up, and pushing her wouldn't help. He respected her too much to force her to speak before she was ready. All he could do was offer her his support, in his own quiet way, and hope that in time she would feel safe enough to share the rest of her story. That night as Tom lay in bed, he thought about Kaya's words. There was so much pain in her, so much unspoken grief. He wished he could make it go away, but he knew that wasn't something he could do. All he could offer was his presence, and he hoped that would be enough. In the days that followed, Kaya continued her quiet routine. She didn't speak much, but Tom could tell that she was slowly starting to open up, bit by bit. There were moments when their conversations lasted a little longer, and moments when her smile seemed a little more genuine. But Tom knew that the real Kaya, the woman who had hidden so much of herself for so long, was still just out of reach. He wasn't sure what it would take to break down the walls she had built around herself, but he wasn't giving up. As long as Kaya needed him, he would be there. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but Tom knew that sometimes the hardest battles were the ones fought within. It had been a few weeks since Tom first took Kaya into his home, and while things between them had settled into a quiet routine, Tom could sense that the calm before the storm was coming. There was something weighing heavily on Kaya, something she hadn't fully shared with him. It was a feeling that nagged at him, like a question left unanswered, one that for some reason she couldn't bring herself to speak aloud. Tom had grown to care for her in his quiet way. He admired her strength, her resilience in the face of adversity, and the quiet dignity with which she carried herself. But there were times, especially when she thought no one was looking, that Tom saw something in her eyes, something so deep, so unresolved, that he couldn't help but wonder what had caused her such pain. It was on an ordinary afternoon, with the sun high in the sky and a soft breeze blowing across the ranch, that Tom's suspicions were confirmed. He had just finished repairing a section of the fence when he saw a group of riders in the distance. At first, he thought they might be passing travelers, but as they drew closer he recognized their faces. They were men from the nearby town, men who often came to the saloon or worked on various ranches around the area. But there was one thing about them that made Tom pause. They were looking directly at him. As the group neared the ranch, Tom's eyes shifted instinctively toward Kaya, who had been working in the garden near the house. She looked up at the approaching men, her expression unreadable. For a moment their eyes met, and Tom could see something shift in her, something dark, something fearful. It was then that he realized that whatever Kaya was running from, whatever secret she was hiding, was about to catch up with her. The group of men dismounted as they reached the porch, and one of them, a tall man with a scar across his cheek, stepped forward. Tom stood still, unsure of what to say, but his instincts told him something was wrong. "Afternoon, Tom," the man said gruffly, his voice low. "I'm looking for someone." Tom didn't speak immediately, studying the man's face, trying to figure out what was going on. He didn't like the way the man's eyes kept darting toward Kaya, who was now standing near the door, her body tense, her hands clenched at her sides. "We're looking for a woman," the man continued, his gaze finally resting on Kaya. "A girl by the name of Kaya." "You seen her?" Tom's heart sank. Kaya's name was like a spark, igniting something in him that he didn't want to acknowledge. He glanced at Kaya, who was now looking at the ground, avoiding eye contact. She had never mentioned her full name, never explained her past in any way that would have clued him in to the fact that someone might be looking for her. And yet, here they were. Men from her past, the ones she had run from, the ones who had come to take her away. Kaya didn't move. She stood frozen in place, her eyes wide, as if she had just been caught in a trap. Tom's mind raced as he tried to process what was happening. He could see now that Kaya's past wasn't just a chapter in her life. It was a shadow that had been following her, one that she couldn't outrun. Tom turned to the man and cleared his throat.
"I don't know who you're talking about. I've never heard of anyone named Kaya." The man's eyes narrowed as he glanced at Tom.
"You're telling me you don't know this woman?" He pointed toward Kaya. "She's a fugitive. We've been tracking her down for weeks." Tom felt a cold knot twist in his stomach. He didn't want to believe what he was hearing, but the fear in Kaya's eyes said it all. She had been hiding something, and now the truth was coming to light. Kaya stepped forward, her voice shaking as she spoke.
"It's true. They've been looking for me."
For a long time now. Tom's chest tightened as he turned to her. He could see the pain in her face, the struggle in her eyes. She had been holding this secret for so long, keeping it buried deep inside her. But now, in the face of these men, it was all spilling out. "You don't have to stay here," Tom said, his voice low and urgent. "You can go. You don't need to face this alone."
Kaya shook her head slowly, her expression filled with regret.
"I can't run anymore," she whispered. "They'll just keep coming, keep looking for me. And I can't leave. Not after everything you've done for me." Tom's heart ached at the pain in her voice. He wanted to protect her, to tell her that she was safe here. But the reality was that these men weren't going to leave without her. They had come for her, and no matter how much Tom cared for her, he couldn't change the truth of her past. "We're not leaving without her," the man with the scar said, his voice firm and unyielding. Kaya's eyes flicked back to Tom, her gaze filled with a mix of fear and gratitude. She wanted to stay, but she knew she couldn't. She had to face whatever had been chasing her for so long. And she wasn't about to let Tom get caught up in the mess of her life. "I'll go with them," Kaya said, her voice steady but filled with sorrow. "I can't put you in danger. You've done enough." Tom felt a deep sense of helplessness. He didn't want her to leave, didn't want her to face whatever these men had in store for her. But he also knew that there was nothing he could do to stop them. These men had come for a reason, and no amount of pleading would change their minds. He stepped forward, his eyes fixed on the men. "She's not going anywhere until I know what this is about," Tom said, his voice firm. The man with the scar stepped closer, his expression hardening. "You're making a mistake. This doesn't concern you." "I don't care if it does or not," Tom replied, his voice unwavering. "If you want her, you'll have to go through me first." For a moment there was silence. Kaya looked at Tom, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and relief. She didn't know what to say. She didn't know if Tom's bravery would save her, or if it would make things worse. But in that moment, she felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a long time. Hope. The man with the scar stared at Tom for a long moment, his eyes calculating. Then, with a sigh, he stepped back. "Fine. But this isn't over," he said gruffly. "We'll be back." As the men mounted their horses and rode away, Tom turned to Kaya, his heart pounding in his chest. What was that all about? Who are they? Kaya took a deep breath, her hands shaking as she wiped her face. They're after me, she said quietly. I'm not who I said I was. I didn't run because I wanted to. I ran because they killed my family. Tom's blood ran cold as he listened to her words. He had never imagined that Kaya's past was so dark, so full of violence. She had been running from something far worse than he could have ever guessed. I'm sorry, Kaya whispered, her voice breaking. I never wanted to drag you into this. But now, it's out, and there's no running anymore. Tom didn't know what to say. The world seemed to have shifted beneath his feet, but he couldn't help but feel a deep sense of loyalty to Kaya. Whatever her past held, whatever secret she was keeping, it didn't change the person she was now. He couldn't let her face this alone. You don't have to face this by yourself, Tom said softly. I'll help you. Whatever happens, we'll figure this out together. Kaya looked at him, her eyes filled with gratitude. Thank you, she whispered. I don't know what I'd do without you. The two of them stood there in the fading light, a new understanding between them. The storm that had been brewing for so long had finally arrived, and neither of them knew what the future held. But for the first time in a long while, Kaya felt like she wasn't completely alone.
And that, in itself, was worth more than she could say. The day after the group of men left, the air on the ranch felt different.
It was as if the very ground beneath them was holding its breath waiting for something. Kaya hadn't spoken much since their encounter, but Tom could sense the turmoil within her. She was torn, caught between her past and the possibility of a future that was uncertain, fragile, and filled with risks. Tom had spent the night thinking about everything. About the truth Kaya had shared, about the men who were after her, and about what he could do to protect her. The truth was, he didn't know how to stop the past from coming back for her. He didn't know how to make it go away. But there was one thing he was sure of. He wasn't going to let her face it alone. As the morning sun rose, bathing the ranch in warm light, Tom found Kaya by the barn. She was feeding the horses, her hands moving with a quiet efficiency, though there was a look of deep concentration on her face. Her usual strength seemed to have been replaced by a quiet sadness, as if the weight of everything she had been running from was finally catching up to her. Kaya, Tom said softly, approaching her. We need to talk. She looked up at him, her face pale, her eyes distant. For a moment she said nothing, just stared at him as if she were lost in her own thoughts. Then, with a small sigh, she set the bucket of feed down and wiped her hands on her jeans. I know what you're thinking, she said, her voice low. You're thinking it's time for me to leave? Tom frowned, shaking his head. No, that's not what I'm thinking. I'm thinking you don't have to face this alone. I'm thinking that I'm not going to let you go without a fight. Kaya's eyes widened, and for a moment, it seemed like she might say something, but she didn't. She only stood there, her hands trembling slightly as she looked at him. There was a part of her that wanted to believe him, that wanted to trust that things could be different. But the reality of her past was too heavy to ignore, and the thought of dragging someone else into it felt unfair.
You don't understand, Tom, she whispered. I can't let you get involved.
These men, they're dangerous. I've seen what they're capable of. And I don't want you to be part of it. You don't deserve that. Tom stepped closer to her, his voice steady. I understand more than you think. I know you're scared, but I'm not going to let you carry this burden alone. You don't have to face them on your own. You're not just some stranger to me, Kaya. You've become important to me, and I'll protect you no matter what. Kaya's heart fluttered in her chest as she looked into his eyes. She could see the sincerity there, the quiet strength in his words. He wasn't saying it out of obligation or pity. He truly meant it. But could she allow him to take on her pain? Could she let him into a part of her life that was filled with such darkness and uncertainty? For so long, Kaya had convinced herself that the only way to survive was to keep running, to keep moving forward with no attachments, no connections. But now, standing before Tom, she realized that she had built up walls so high and so strong that she couldn't even see the possibility of a life without them. And yet, Tom was offering her something she had long ago stopped believing in: safety, companionship, and the chance for something more. But the fear was still there, lurking in the back of her mind. What if the men came back? What if they hurt him? What if this was all a mistake, and she was dragging him into a battle he wasn't prepared for? "Tom," Kaya said, her voice shaking, "I don't want you to suffer because of me. You don't know what I've been through. You don't know how dangerous this is." Tom reached out and gently cupped her face, his thumb brushing against her cheek in a soft, reassuring gesture. "I don't need to know everything. I don't need to know your entire past to know that I care about you. I don't need to understand all the details to know that I'm willing to fight for you. That's what matters." Kaya's breath caught in her throat as the reality of his words settled in. She could feel the sincerity in every one of his actions, in every soft touch, every word of comfort he had given her. And, for the first time in a long while, she felt something she hadn't felt in years: a flicker of hope. "I've spent so long running, Tom," Kaya admitted, her voice trembling. "So long believing that I was alone in all of this. But now you're telling me that I don't have to be? That I don't have to run anymore?" Tom smiled softly, his thumb brushing against her skin once more. "You don't have to run anymore, not as long as I'm here." For a moment, there was only silence between them, the kind of silence that felt heavy with meaning. Kaya's heart raced as she looked at Tom, unsure of what to do next. Everything in her told her to walk away, to protect him from the dangers that were sure to follow. But something inside her, the part of her that had longed for connection, for belonging, was telling her to stay. "I don't know how to let go of my past," Kaya whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I don't know how to trust that it won't follow me, that it won't catch up to us." Tom's gaze softened as he looked at her, his eyes full of understanding. "I can't promise that everything will be easy. I can't promise that there won't be challenges or dangers. But I can promise you this: we'll face them together, and that makes all the difference." Kaya let out a shaky breath, her eyes filling with unshed tears. She wanted to believe him, wanted to believe that they could find a way to move forward, that together they could face whatever was coming. But the fear was still there, a weight on her chest that wouldn't lift. And yet there was a part of her that felt lighter, as if a burden had been shared, even if just for a moment. She reached up and placed her hand over his, her fingers brushing against his rough skin. "I don't know if I'm ready, Tom. I don't know if I can give you everything you deserve." Tom smiled gently, his hand holding hers firmly. "You don't have to give me everything. You just have to let me be here. That's all I need." In that moment, Kaya knew that she wasn't alone anymore. She had spent so many years running, hiding, convincing herself that she didn't deserve the kind of love and care that Tom was offering her. But now she realized that maybe, just maybe, she could let someone in. Maybe she could stop running, stop hiding, and let herself be loved. "I'm scared," Kaya whispered, her voice trembling. "But I want to stay. I want to try." Tom's heart swelled as he pulled her into a gentle embrace, holding her close. "Then we'll try. Together." The decision had been made. Kaya wasn't alone anymore, and neither was Tom. They would face whatever came next, side by side. It wasn't going to be easy, and it wasn't going to be quick, but they were going to try. They were going to fight for each other, for the future they had yet to build. And, in that moment, surrounded by the quiet beauty of the ranch, with the sound of the wind rustling through the trees and the warmth of the sun on their faces, they both knew that no matter what the world threw at them, they had each other, and that was enough.